We've obviously all heard about the Jimmy Butler trade rumors and the convoluted nonsense going on with the Miami Heat organization as a whole, with Pat Riley strong-arming things and going out publicly saying we're not trading Jimmy Butler despite still fielding calls. And things have been rather interesting because Jimmy Butler, more recently in a press conference, said that he enjoys Miami off the court, but on the court, not so much. And when a reporter pressed him a little harder and inquired as to if he thought that he could find himself loving Miami on the court again, he said,
"Joy back here on the court."
Probably not.
which means that he's leaning towards a trade. Now, we understand that Jimmy Butler has been labeled a toxic teammate and player, but for the most part, throughout his many stoppages in his career, he's been pretty right about the organizations that he's been a part of. The Timberwolves with Karl-Anthony Towns, and then eventually with the Philadelphia 76ers, and the instance where they picked Tobias Harris to keep over him. I'm sure we all remember that one. If you're new to the channel, it's your boy Wraith Hoops. We're going to be talking about what all we understand for certain and what is still a little bit muggy and in the woods regarding the Jimmy Butler rumors. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this one. So Jimmy Butler is right now in the middle of the remainder of a 3-year, $146 million deal, and he was hunting for a max contract extension after the end of last season in the summertime of 2024. However, he didn't end up getting it. Now, some people cited health and the availability of players, particularly Pat Riley saying this, over anything else, which explains why he was put into that position where they didn't really feel comfortable giving him that money. Combine that with the fact that he's already 35 and things don't really look great. Now, because of the league's over 38 rule, he's only able to sign a max extension of 2 years that would put him around the market of $112, $113 million, which is a hefty chunk of change, especially when you look into the realm of the Paul Georges who have signed for max contracts and are not fitting the bill. It's almost as if they traded out Tobias Harris for another Tobias Harris at a higher price point, and it's not really winning them games. Now, we could just say that it's a fit thing and, Paul George is going to come back and eventually, just put things really together with those guys alongside Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid, but it remains to be seen, which with that being the precedent, and then you also think about the organization as a whole with the Miami Heat and how strong-armed they tend to be with their players just across time. Alonzo Mourning couldn't get it, D. Wade couldn't get it, so why would Jimmy Butler be able to get it? Now granted, we all know Jimmy Butler in the regular season. He's okay, he's cool, he might be an all-star caliber player, but in the postseason, the guy just turns into a literal demigod, going ballistic in every way possible. Yes, we remember the 2 times he led his team into the finals when they had no business being there. Going to conference finals is nothing to him. It's something that he loves to do, and he loves to play competition at the highest level of basketball. In those elimination games, that playoff Jimmy, it just hits different. In more recent news, we understand that he ended up actually being turned away from a trade to the 76ers, who were inquiring about getting him back, which seemed to be a little bit interesting. But one thing that they're going to have to watch out for if they do decide to potentially trade him is going to be deciding whether or not they're going to be able to actually trade him to a team that's willing to give them a decent markup. And the issue is, if they knew they weren't going to give him the extension and they knew money was the biggest thing on his mind, then last summer they probably should have tried to offload him then when he had more value. But now teams know he doesn't want to be with you, and while they're still going to pay a premium price and you can set the price point, it's not going to be as high as it once was going to be. And with him carrying about $48 million on the books for this year going into next year, where he's going to be having $52 million, it's not looking like something that's going to be the most easily absorbed, especially with the second apron being the way that it is with the new NBA CBA deal. We're talking about a Jimmy Butler who in 44 minutes against the Detroit Pistons earlier on, just a few games ago, they ended up losing by 1 point, 124 to 125. But in those 44 minutes of action, he put together 35, 19, and 10. And it was a stellar, phenomenal game for him. Honestly, one of the highlights of this season thus far in his books. However, in January, and on the first and the second days, he's only played a combined 52 minutes in total, 25 minutes against the Pelicans and then 27 against the Indiana Pacers. Both of those games, he had 9 points. And it's not as if he can't shoot the ball or if he just doesn't have a shot that he likes. He's choosing not to shoot the ball, which is him in a way throwing a fit and letting them know, I can go off at any point in time, but I just don't want to if I'm not going to get paid the way that I feel like I should be paid. And I feel as though it's a righteous fit to a certain way. I remember when James Harden had his whole debacle in Houston, but that was a little bit different because Houston gave him everything that he asked for and he just wasn't able to get the job done. Jimmy Butler has been asking for help. He's been asking for another star to come there, and they have just repetitively failed to get another star in there. And even under that context, if you're not going to be able to find another star and he in the playoffs is going to be expected to be the leader of that organization and push them to the highest level of basketball stardom because Tyler Hero hasn't yet taken that next step in the playoffs at the very least just yet, and Bam Adebayo is reliable but not your number one option, then you need to pay him as such. And if he ends up falling apart and falling off the ropes, then yes, at that point you could say this was a mildly bad decision, but you only have to lock yourself to it for about 2 years. And to be quite honest, if you've been going the past roughly 3 seasons without making any blockbuster deal, unless you want to consider adding Terry Rozier to the roster, a blockbuster deal, there's not really much reason to think that you're going to do anything superb over the next couple seasons. Now, granted, Miami is a great city to live in. It's a nice area. People love it off the court. Jimmy Butler said he still loves it off the court. It's just that a lot of players don't love it on the court. And while the Spurs are known for having a certain level of culture, Miami also has their other mantras and logic behind their culture to the tune of guys like Udonis Haslem sticking around for an extended period of time. But it remains to be seen what that will ultimately end up yielding when the time comes. Despite that, so far this regular season, Jimmy Butler in the games that he's played averages 17.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, 4.7 assists, 1.2 steals, and about half a block in just 31 minutes of action a night. He shoots 55% from the field and 37.5% from three-point range. Now, if you even attribute this to the fact that he's hunting shots more, or he's become a more advanced player, that's something that's fair to say because across his career, he averages 18, 5, and 4 in 33 minutes of action. Now, he shoots 47.2% from the field across his career and then 33% from three-point range in his career. So, by all metrics, he's up in most of his categories except for points per game because he's throwing his fit right now. But aside from that, at 6'7", 230 at the age of 35, despite his multiple injuries that he's ended up sustaining and just kind of linger around, he's been a dog. He's been an animal. And when you think of players in this league that embody that dog mentality that the Miami Heat have, Jimmy Butler's right there at the top of the list. So the idea that he should be somebody that would retire as a Heat player, as he said that he wanted to at one point, it just made the most sense to me that that would ultimately end up being the case. But that remains to be seen. I believe that there's like an 80% chance that he does eventually get traded and about 20% chance that they do end up, fixing things up even if they don't give him a max contract because no matter what ends up happening, he's going to get paid his $52 million next year. He has a player option. Why would he not opt into it? Even if he thinks another team wouldn't take a risk on him and pay him a max contract at 36 years old, then he still gets to sit on that $52 million and say, hey, I did pretty darn well for myself, and then take the highest bidder at that point. Now, he does say he wants to get traded to literally any team that's not Miami, but of course, not every team can take on his salary, as I said. And at the same time, there's going to be a lot of organizations that just don't feel like they're going to be in the best position to win with him. There's certain teams that won't look the most ideal with him on the roster. You could add him to a super young team, but at the same time, with that team, they might not be really good. And in that same vein, you also have to be willing to deal with the contract implications of that and lock yourselves down for about 3.5 seasons worth of money. And if you think that's a great idea, then cool. A team like the Charlotte Hornets, who are in purgatory and have to deal with the injuries to LaMelo Ball all the time, despite him going ballistic to start the season, maybe they would be willing to sit there and make a deal and find some way to scrounge up some money and scrounge up some players to send down to Miami in another deal after they sent Terry Rozier down there, just so that they can add onto their already growing young core where you have your Miles Bridges, you have your Brandon Millers, you have your LaMelo Balls. If you can keep that core together and you add Jimmy Butler to that, maybe you see something phenomenal happen. Who's to say? But at the same time, that doesn't really fit the timeline of the rest of your guys. But if it alleviates some of the stress off LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller is allowed to develop a little bit more, then maybe you think that this is something you should be willing to do. But there's a lot of other organizations that are up in arms and trying to field phone calls and have conversations with Pat Riley in that front office and Eric Spoelstra and those guys and see what they can do to potentially get them to move on from Jimmy Butler. Now, again, like I said, there's a 20% chance in my book that he stays. I think it's definitely more likely that he takes that foot out the door because he's ready to go. And I don't see a world where this relationship, as public as it has gone, is going to be repairable, especially considering the fact that the organization involved is the Miami Heat and not a team like the Detroit Pistons. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm always interested to hear what you have to say. It's been your boy Wraith Hoops. As always, go ahead and like the video, subscribe, and turn on post notifications. Good morning, good evening, and good night, no matter where you're in the globe watching. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.